Um, so I'd like to come back to some of the other issues in the second part, tomorrow, the world. How is Hong Kong kind of a test case for this? We talked about the history and the unusual, how all this came to be and the events of 2019 and 2020. How do you take that and that very particular kind of example of Hong Kong and make it a template for what China could do elsewhere?
Right. Well, okay. First of all, Taiwan, and if they have their way, and Xi Jinping, kind of realizes what he thinks is as his historical mission to bring Taiwan back into the fold, then I think that's a very clear template, right? I mean, you go after education, as is being done in Hong Kong very aggressively now. You go after media. You go after civil society and destroy NGOs. Eventually, you go after free churches, which we think is one of the last areas to be rolled up in Hong Kong. So, I mean, that's pretty clear. I think where, the analogy is not, it's quite as precise is, again, I don't think you're going to have Chinese troops in, we do have some in Djibouti and some other places now, I guess, but let's take Cambodia or Lithuania for an example. Cambodia is probably a better example because I think that you're seeing, Hun Sen says, who do I call for help if not the Chinese? You can use the renminbi. So I think you're going to see, and we've seen the no coincidence. Strong men like Hun Sen will work with the strong men from Beijing. It's no coincidence that the free media in Cambodia is finished, right? I don't think it's any coincidence that the Chinese are selling internet and other, mobile telecoms technology to Africa, often working through corrupt elites to have, and by the way, your colleague, our friend Sheridan Prasso has written about this for Business Week, working with local elites to sell high-priced equipment, which can also be used for surveillance and enriches the elites who then will, I think, do Beijing's bidding. I'm not saying they're going to have Chinese national security law curriculum in an African, textbook, but I can tell you that Taiwan, the maps that they have in there are going to reflect what China wants, just as, Delta, United, other American airlines had to redraw their maps to make it clear that Taiwan was not a sovereign country. So I think it'll be on all these little issues, it'll first be on maps and kind of and issues about Taiwan and about Hong Kong. But, eventually, I mean, look at how Norway was punished when a Chinese dissident, Liu Xiaobo, was given the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, they basically locked Norway out for 8 years, despite all this kowtowing by Norway. It wasn't until after Liu Xiaobo died in Chinese custody that the Chinese eased up on the Norwegians. And I think it's very unlikely you're going to see another Nobel Peace Prize laureate from China for a long, long time. So I don't know. I mean, is Norway less free? Well, yeah, they are, because their Peace Prize committee can't necessarily pick. I mean, there are a lot of good candidates. I'm not saying that a Chinese person should win, but they can't actually pick freely from among the candidates, even for something as kind of, I don't know, I would say non-controversial as a Nobel Peace Prize.
Patty Krantz is asking, what about Lithuania? And particularly, what are they doing in Lithuania?
Yeah, I'm sure, given your time in Russia, you probably watching that very closely. So yeah, I think Lithuania is a really interesting example. They're a Baltic country, and the Hong Kongers drew inspiration from the Baltics, and they actually had about 200,000 people out in something called the Baltic Way in Hong Kong in end of August 2019, and it was commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Baltic Way that took place as those three countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, were getting their independence, and sort of shortly before the Soviet Union fell apart. And so the Baltics and Hong Kong are, they're these small countries, and they have, I think, a lot of ties. And so Lithuania has been very supportive of Hong Kong. And by the way, they've had, when they had protesters in support of Hong Kong, getting back to the earlier question about what we're going to see, you had the Chinese ambassador to Lithuania watching as a group of thugs beat up pro-Hong Kong protesters in Lithuania. So those are also the kinds of tactics I think we're going to increasingly see abroad. We see this in Chinatown in London, where mainland thugs beat up Hong Kong protesters at an anti-Asian hate rally of all things. So, but Lithuania is being punished because it's standing with Taiwan, it stood with Hong Kong, and it had the temerity to open a Taiwan trade office, essentially a quasi-embassy. And so because of that, actually China is threatening the whole EU project. They're telling German automakers that they're telling the Lithuanians, they just actually took out the country code for Lithuania. So Lithuania can't import or export anything to China because there's no country code. China says it hasn't done anything against the WTO, just sorry, you don't exist as a country. So that's an interesting way of zeroing out a nation. But then they've gone further and they've told German automakers that they can't use components made or assembled in Lithuania for cars or for export to China. I mean, so it's actually thrown the EU into I don't want to say turmoil, but it's really testing ties within the EU. So we think China has a capacity for mischief making that is quite at odds with its earlier claim that it was going to have a peaceful rise.
And the role of the U.S. in all this. So we saw the U.S. during the protests, take steps in Congress. The U.S. Congress, Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell got together on something. He was majority leader in the Senate at the time, to basically say, if you're not going to support these, and they called it in the legislation, pro-democracy efforts, we are going to rescind parts of our trade agreements, essentially allowing very free trade in Hong Kong. Now, some would say that actually punished U.S. businesses doing business in Hong Kong more than it did the Chinese government. But the U.S. is very clear on this. The UK is very clear on this. The UK is now, saying to Hong Kong residents, "Come, we will make you citizens. Give you a path to citizenship. Make it easy for you to come to the UK." Has that made it worse? Has that made the crackdown worse on Hong Kong?
Yeah, I think we have to be realistic about the limits of U.S. power, of any nation's power, and particularly with a country as large as China, an economy, as I said earlier, that's as significant as China's. There's a limit to what impact it really has. I think that going forward, we need to think really hard about our reliance on China. Let me get back to that point in a minute. I don't know that the actual impact economically has been very great. I mean, we've sanctioned some Hong Kong officials. They've sanctioned some U.S. officials. But look, pension fund money is probably going from your pension, your 401k into China today. I mean, we certainly haven't been shutting off the flow of money. I mean, Wall Street is, continuing to cozy up with China. So I can't say that it, really had any material impact. I think it had a moral impact in Hong Kong. And by the way, the UK announcement that you alluded to, where people who had what was called a BNO, British National Overseas Passport, who in the past would not have a path to citizenship in Britain, now do. And they're thinking of extending that so that the children of those people would also have a path to citizenship. And already, I think in the first year of that, or year or so, year and a half of that plan, I think something like 90,000 or 100,000 people have already applied or come. I mean, the numbers are pretty significant in a city the size of Hong Kong. I think it's interesting. After the U.S. election in 2020, I just returned. I was talking to a friend in Hong Kong, and he said, "Oh, everybody's so sad." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, Trump lost the election." And I mean, Hong Kong is one place that Trump would have won in a landslide. We can talk about whether or not his policies were effective or whether he really knew how to deal with Xi Jinping or not. But the Hong Kong people loved his rhetoric on Hong Kong. And, Mike Pompeo was very popular. Taiwan, same thing. So, whether or not the policies have really proven effective, I think the jury's out. But they certainly have buoyed sentiment among the pro-democracy people in Hong Kong. And I think there's, quite frankly, a lot of concern among the Biden people that, or among Hong Kongers and Taiwanese now, as to whether or not the Biden administration will be as tough on China, given given the record of the Obama and the Clinton administrations. I think so far those fears have proven unjustified, but again, time will tell.
Right. Well, they've kept a lot of the tariffs in place and things.
Yes, yeah, no, so that's been very interesting, yeah.
Yeah.